They laughed behind my back at his funeral. I could hear the whispers, the sneers, the muffled chuckles. Even as I stood there, eyes red, heart breaking, trying to say goodbye to the man who raised me, they couldn't resist. My uncles, cousins, even some neighbors, all of them treated me like a joke. I was the disgrace, the disappointment, the one who didn't live up to the family name. No one knew the truth, and no one cared to ask. They'd already written my story: failure, shame, exile. My father's death only gave them more fuel. As the priest spoke, I kept my head down, trying to block out the pain, but it kept flooding in, memory after memory. Flashbacks hit me like waves. The time my uncle kicked me out of the family business. The look of disgust on my aunt's face when I asked for help. The night I overheard my cousins calling me the lost cause. And through all of that, my father barely said a word. He'd gone quiet in his last years, especially about me. It hurt more than anything, to be abandoned, even by him. But then something shifted. The priest cleared his throat and said, "Mr. Devlin left behind a letter, specifically addressed to be read aloud today." The room went still. No one expected that. I could see the tension spread across the room like fire. My stomach twisted. Was he going to shame me too? One final blow from beyond the grave? But what came next shattered everything. The priest began reading, and my father's voice came alive through the words. He spoke of truths no one in the room knew. He told them how I took care of him when he was sick, how I gave up everything to make sure he had what he needed. He admitted he asked me to stay away from the family, not because he was ashamed, but because he knew how toxic they were. He said he couldn't protect me in life, so he was doing it now, in death. He called out names. He named the lies they told, the money they stole, the betrayal they buried. One by one, their faces dropped. The smirks vanished. My father's words were calm, but they hit like thunder. And then he said something I'll never forget. "My only regret is letting them silence you. But today, I speak for you." When the letter ended, there was silence. Real silence. No one looked at me. No one laughed. Some couldn't even lift their heads. The disgrace they mocked was the only one left standing with dignity. And in that moment, I wasn't broken. I was seen, finally. Even in death, he protected me. His last letter was a bullet of truth that tore through every lie they ever told about me. At my father's funeral, I stood alone. People didn't look at me with sympathy. They looked at me with judgment. They whispered that I didn't belong there, that I'd failed him, that I'd been a disappointment. My relatives didn't even try to hide their smirks. They thought I'd abandoned my father, that I'd turned my back on him in his final years. But they didn't know the truth. They never asked. They believed what they wanted to believe because it made it easier to hate me. What they didn't know was that my father and I shared something deeper than they ever saw. A bond built on late-night talks, shared pain, and quiet promises. I had been there, not in public, not in front of the cameras or at family events, but in the background, doing the hard things. I was the one driving him to appointments, sitting with him in the silence when the pain was too much to talk. I was the one he cried in front of, but I didn't brag about it. I didn't need recognition. I just wanted him to be okay. And he knew that. Still, when he passed, I thought maybe he had taken those truths with him. Maybe he had let the world believe the worst about me, and I would never get the chance to clear my name. I stood there, surrounded by people who had erased everything I'd done, who only saw what they wanted to see, the outcast, the failure, the disgrace. Then the priest pulled out a letter. He said it was written by my father, meant to be read on this day. My heart stopped. I didn't know what was coming. Maybe more shame. Maybe he had truly given up on me. But as the priest started to read, my father's voice filled the room. Calm, clear, and full of truth. He talked about me, about how I had been his quiet strength, how I had sacrificed more than anyone knew. He explained why I wasn't always around the rest of the family, because he wanted to protect me from their poison. He said the others were more concerned about appearances, about control, about inheritance. But I was the one who truly loved him. He said he was proud of me, not just as a son, but as a man. People shifted in their seats. Some looked at me with wide eyes. Others couldn't even lift their heads. The truth hit them harder than anything I could have said. My father gave me something in that moment. Not revenge, but recognition, validation. He told the world I wasn't the disgrace. I was his legacy. And just like that, everything changed. I came to mourn. They came to mock. The moment I walked into the church, I could feel the stares. Cold, judging, some smirking, others whispering behind folded programs. I hadn't even sat down before I heard someone mutter, "He showed up?" like I had no right to be there, like I didn't belong at my own father's funeral. They saw me as the black sheep, the one who disgraced the family, the one who'd made mistakes, distanced himself, and didn't follow the path they thought was right. They didn't know my reasons, and they didn't care. I kept my head down, trying not to react, even when I caught my cousins pointing at me, laughing under their breath. My aunt gave me that same bitter look she always had, like just existing in the same room as her was offensive. I sat in silence, clutching the program with shaking hands, trying to focus on my grief, on the man I came to say goodbye to. But all around me, it felt like a war zone made of whispers and fake tears. Then the priest paused. He said there was a letter, my father's final words written before he passed, meant to be read today, in front of everyone. The room tensed. Some leaned forward, curious. Others rolled their eyes, expecting some boring speech. But the moment the priest started reading, everything changed. My father didn't waste time with small talk. His words were direct, sharp, and full of weight. He called out names. He spoke of betrayals and lies that were kept hidden for years. He exposed the greed, the gossip, the manipulation. He told the truth. Truths only he and I knew. He spoke about me. He told them how I stepped away, not because I didn't care, but because he asked me to. Because he didn't want me tangled in the mess the rest of the family created. Because he trusted me. He said I had been his quiet support when no one else was there, and that he owed me more than words could ever repay. Faces turned pale. Some gasped. My uncle stood frozen, mouth slightly open. My cousins looked like they'd just been punched. The same people who had mocked me minutes ago were now being publicly called out by the man they came to honor. And he wasn't silent about their cruelty. His letter was like a mirror, forcing them to see who they really were. By the time the letter ended, the room was silent. No more whispers, no more laughs, just stunned faces and dropped eyes. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. My father had said it all. With that letter, he didn't just defend me. He gave me back my place, my voice, my truth. The funeral started with mockery but ended with respect, and not because I demanded it, but because my father, even in death, made sure I finally got it. I thought he left me behind. When my father died, I believed he had taken the truth with him, the truth about what really happened, about why I had been pushed out, ignored, and treated like I didn't exist. I showed up to his funeral feeling like a stranger. People barely nodded at me. Some didn't even try to hide their disgust. To them, I was the one who disappeared, the one who didn't care, the one who let my father suffer alone. And because my father never spoke up, never explained, I started to believe it too. Maybe I had failed him. Maybe I deserved this silence. But deep down, it didn't make sense. We were close once. He wasn't just my dad. He was my guide, my anchor. He knew me better than anyone. So when he started pulling away, saying less and less to everyone, including me, it hurt in ways I couldn't explain. I thought maybe he was ashamed of me. Maybe he believed the lies the family spread, that I was selfish, that I walked away. I carried that weight alone. I stayed away, not because I didn't care, but because every time I tried to reach out, I was shut down, ignored, or blamed. And he stayed silent through it all. But then, at his funeral, everything changed. The priest held up an envelope and said it was from my father, a letter he asked to be read aloud in front of everyone. I froze. Everyone did. The room shifted from cold indifference to tense anticipation. I didn't know what to expect. More silence, more shame. But the moment the priest began reading, I realized I had been wrong. My father hadn't abandoned me. He had been protecting me. His letter was fire. He spoke calmly, but his words burned every lie to the ground. He explained everything. How he knew what the family said about me, how he watched them twist the truth, shut me out, and pretend like I didn't matter. And he stayed quiet on purpose. Not because he agreed, but because he was planning something bigger. He wrote that he wanted the truth to come out when they couldn't spin it anymore, when he was gone, and they were forced to listen. He talked about how I had stood by him in the quiet ways that mattered, how I gave up parts of my life for his health, how I was the only one who asked nothing in return. He said the silence between us was his way of shielding me, not rejecting me. And now, with nothing left to lose, he let it all out. The room was stunned. People shifted uncomfortably. Some avoided eye contact. Others looked like they'd been slapped. The bridges my father burned with that letter were the same ones that had been used to keep me out. And as they turned to ash, I felt lighter. He didn't leave me behind. He cleared the path ahead. Every insult they threw at me crumbled the second the priest opened his final letter. Before that moment, it felt like I was standing in the middle of a battlefield with no armor. The church was full, but I'd never felt more alone. The way people looked at me said it all. Judgment, disgust, condescending smiles. They laughed quietly like I couldn't hear them, but I did. I heard every word. I saw every smirk. To them, I was the failure of the family, the one who didn't become anything, who had nothing to show. They thought I was weak. They thought I didn't deserve to be there. I stood in the back, trying to stay invisible, trying to hold back the storm inside me. I had come to grieve, to say goodbye to my father, but they made it feel like I was crashing a party I wasn't invited to. My name was barely mentioned. It was like I didn't exist, or worse, like I was some stain they were all trying to forget. My reputation had been dragged through the mud for years, mostly behind closed doors. They whispered lies, painted me as the problem, and over time people started to believe them. And since my father never said anything to defend me, they assumed he agreed. But then the priest spoke. He said my father left a letter, one final message he wanted shared with everyone. Suddenly the room was still. No one knew what was coming, not even me. I held my breath as the priest opened the envelope and began to read. The words that followed flipped everything upside down. My father talked about me. Not the version they created, the one they mocked and dismissed, but the real me. The son who had stayed up with him during his worst nights. The one who made sacrifices quietly, without asking for praise. He said I was the only one who ever showed up when it really mattered. He said I was his greatest pride. And then he did what no one expected. He addressed the lies. Head on. He called out the people who had torn me down, who had twisted stories, who had used my silence to their advantage. He didn't hold back. And with every sentence, it felt like my name was being cleaned, piece by piece. The same mouths that had laughed at me moments before were now sealed shut. Some of them looked away. Others stared at the ground, ashamed. When the letter ended, there was a long pause. The kind of silence that says more than words ever could. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. My father had done it for me. His final words rebuilt everything they tried to destroy. They laughed. He wrote, and in that moment I rose. They thought they'd erased me. For years, my name wasn't spoken at family gatherings. My face was left out of photo albums. They acted like I didn't exist, like I was some shameful secret they were all better off forgetting. I stopped getting invited. They cut me off, twisted stories about me, made it seem like I had abandoned the family. But I hadn't. The truth was, I didn't play by their rules. I didn't bow down to the family's power games, didn't compete for fake approval, or pretend everything was okay. So they shut me out, quietly, completely. When my father died, I wasn't even sure I should go to the funeral. I knew what would happen. I knew they'd look at me like I didn't belong, like I was some outsider showing up where I wasn't wanted. And I was right. The second I walked in, the stares began. Whispers, eye rolls, people nudging each other, clearly talking about me. No one said a kind word. Some didn't even say hello. But I came anyway. Not for them, for him. I sat in silence, feeling the weight of it all. Decades of distance, of lies, of feeling like my truth would never be heard. My father had always been quiet, especially in his last years. I didn't know if he ever told anyone the truth, if he even believed it himself anymore. But then, the priest reached into his folder and pulled out a letter. My father's final message, written to be read aloud, in front of everyone. What happened next changed everything. The letter wasn't long, but every word felt like thunder. My father didn't waste time. He didn't soften his message. He exposed everything. The way certain family members used his illness to grab power, how they rewrote history to make themselves look like heroes and paint me as the villain. He spoke about the manipulation, the greed, the secrets they kept buried for years. But he didn't stop there. He told the truth about me, how I was the one who helped him behind the scenes, how I stood by him even when no one saw, how I walked away not because I didn't care, but because I refused to be part of their cruelty. He named names. He broke the silence. Generations of control, of fear, of lies, all crushed in one reading. The room was frozen. Some were visibly shaking. Others had tears in their eyes, not from grief, but from being exposed. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just sat there letting it all wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt seen. They spent so long trying to erase me. But in the end, it was his voice, his truth, that erased the lies instead. His voice shook. The room froze. The moment the priest started reading my father's letter, it felt like time stopped. Just minutes before, the church was full of forced sympathy and fake tears. My relatives whispered and exchanged smug glances, acting like they had it all figured out. Like they knew who my father really valued, like I didn't matter. I sat there quietly, hearing the judgment in their voices, feeling every stare. They all thought they had won, that they had taken everything from me, including my father's final respect. Then the priest pulled out the envelope. He looked at it for a moment, as if he could feel the weight of what was inside. Then he unfolded the paper, cleared his throat, and began to read. His voice was calm at first, but it shook slightly, like even he didn't expect what was written. The first few lines were warm, my father thanking everyone for coming. But then, the tone shifted. My father's words turned sharp, precise, the kind of sharp that cuts without yelling. He wrote about pain, about betrayal, about truths that had been hidden for years, and he didn't speak in vague terms. He named names. He brought up moments, real, raw, uncomfortable moments that no one else in the room ever thought would be spoken out loud. The priest kept reading, but his voice cracked as he continued. You could feel the air tighten. People stopped breathing. You could hear chairs creaking as bodies shifted, nervous and restless. The once smug faces around me went pale. Some looked at each other in shock. Others stared straight ahead, trying not to react. But it was impossible not to. My father revealed how certain family members manipulated him, isolated him, made decisions behind his back while pretending to care. He exposed the lies they told. Lies that pushed me out of the family, lies that made them look noble while I was painted as a disgrace. He wrote about how he stayed silent because he didn't want more pain. But now, with nothing left to lose, he was telling the truth. And then, he spoke about me. He wrote that I was the only one who truly stood by him, that I was the only one who showed up when no one else did. He said I was his peace, his pride, that the others had chased control, money, and image. But I had shown him love, real love. The priest's voice was trembling now, almost whispering. The silence in the room was loud. No one spoke. No one moved. The power had shifted completely, all from a piece of paper and a man's final words. When the letter ended, the priest folded it slowly, his hands shaking. And just like that, the entire room was changed. My father's letter didn't just speak the truth. It shattered the mask every single person was wearing. And all it took was the priest's voice breaking as he read the words no one expected to hear. They whispered insults, until his letter screamed louder than all of them. I walked into my father's funeral expecting cold shoulders, but what I got was straight-up ridicule. Quiet, snide remarks as I passed by. Fake sympathy followed by fake laughter. People leaning toward each other, whispering things they wanted me to hear. They weren't even hiding it. It was clear. They thought I didn't belong there. They thought I was a disappointment, the black sheep, the one who vanished when things got hard. And because my father never said anything while he was alive, they assumed they were right. I sat there in silence, hands clenched, heart pounding. Not because I was angry, not yet, but because I felt powerless. These were the same people who twisted stories for years, who turned every conversation into a weapon. And now they were wrapping it all up in polite smiles and church clothes, acting like saints while throwing daggers and whispers. Then the priest stepped forward. He said my father had written a letter, his final words. He wanted them read out loud, right here, right now. Instantly, the room shifted. You could feel it, the tension, like the air got heavier. Some people straightened up in their seats. Others looked confused. I held my breath. I didn't know what he wrote. I didn't even know if I wanted to know. And then the first words came out. Calm, director, honest. My father started by thanking everyone. A brief, polite opening. But just a few lines in, everything changed. He began to speak the truth, the kind no one expected. He called out the lies, the backstabbing, the manipulation. He wrote about how people in that very room tried to divide the family, to paint themselves as perfect while dragging others down, especially me. He wrote that he knew exactly what was happening, even when he said nothing, that their whispers weren't secrets, that their judgment wasn't hidden. And then he wrote about me. He said I had been the one who stood quietly by him through his worst days, that while others performed their care for attention, I showed up when no one was watching, that I had been the only one who loved him without asking for anything in return. You could hear a pin drop. No one laughed anymore. No one whispered. His words hit them harder than any confrontation ever could. It was like he dropped a truth bomb right in the middle of their performance, and all the masks fell off. In less than 10 minutes, everything they believed about me, about him, about themselves, it all shattered. I didn't have to say a word. I didn't need revenge. That letter did it all. They whispered insults, thinking their lies would be the last word. But my father had the last word, and it roared louder than every whisper in that room. He died quiet, but his letter, it spoke every truth they tried to hide. When my father passed away, it felt like his silence had followed him to the grave. For years, he barely spoke about the past. It was as if he was trying to protect the family from something, or maybe he was just tired of fighting. But the silence hurt. It left so many questions unanswered, left me wondering where I stood in his life. I wasn't sure if he was holding back for my sake, or if he had just given up on making things right. Either way, I felt like he left me in the dark. The funeral felt like the final chapter to this long, unresolved story. People gathered, but no one talked about him the way I remembered him, the way he had been before everything went wrong. Instead, they danced around his legacy, pretending he was just another good guy who lived quietly and peacefully, keeping his secrets buried. They spoke in vague terms, as if to cover up the cracks that ran through our family's history. It felt like everyone was lying. They didn't want the truth to come out, but my father had a different plan. As the ceremony went on, I expected the usual, a few polite words, a few fake tears, but then the priest pulled out an envelope. He told the room that my father had left a letter that he wanted read aloud at the funeral. The moment the priest opened it, the room grew eerily still. People shifted nervously, unsure of what was coming next. I could feel my heart race. What could be inside? What had my father left behind? The priest began to read. His voice was steady, but each word seemed to crack through the silence of the room. My father's words weren't the soft, passive farewell I expected. He spoke with the clarity of a man who had nothing left to lose. He talked about the truth, the hidden things, the lies that had been buried under layers of silence for years, the things no one had the courage to say while he was alive. And then it all came out. The truth about the family, the way some people had manipulated their way into power, the way secrets had been kept to protect reputations, and the lies they'd told to cover their tracks. My father didn't hold back. He talked about me too, how I was the only one who stood by him, even when it wasn't easy. He said I was the one who never judged him, even when everyone else did. The room went cold. The gasps from my relatives were the loudest sound. Their faces turned pale. Some couldn't even look up. My father's words had shattered everything they had worked so hard to hide. All the whispers, the secrets, the lies, exposed in one powerful letter. My father had been quiet in life, but in death, his voice was louder than all their deception. He had taken everything they thought they could bury and brought it to the surface, forcing everyone to face the truth. It was like he'd written his own redemption, flipping our family history on its head in one final act of courage. They mocked me all morning until the letter made them speechless. The whispers started the second I walked into the room. I could feel their eyes on me, the judgment in their gazes, sharper than any words they would dare to say out loud. They didn't even try to hide it. It was like they all had a script where I was the villain, the disappointment, the black sheep of the family. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried to stay out of their drama, they always found a way to drag me into it, to make me feel like I wasn't good enough. The funeral was no different. My father had passed, and I thought it would be a time for peace, for mourning. But they didn't see it that way. To them, it was just another opportunity to remind me of everything I hadn't done, everything I wasn't. I sat there trying to ignore the murmurs, trying to hold my ground, but inside I was seething. How could they not see me? How could they not understand? Then just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the priest stepped forward. He looked at the crowd, then at me and said, "There's a letter." My father's final words, he said. Everyone turned to look at me, and I could feel the smugness in the air. They thought this letter would be just another confirmation of what they already believed, that I wasn't worth my father's time, that I was the screw-up, the one who didn't belong. The priest unfolded the paper, and the room grew quiet. I don't think anyone expected what came next. As he began to read, I could feel the shift. My father's words weren't what anyone had anticipated. He didn't mention any of the fake pleasantries they expected, didn't paint the image of a quiet, passive man that they wanted to believe he was. My father's letter was a bombshell, a truth they weren't ready for. He started with the lies, the way they had turned his illness into a power struggle, the way they had tried to control everything and everyone. He spoke about the manipulation, the false smiles, the way they had isolated me while pretending to be the loving family. He didn't hold back. And then, just as the room started to feel heavy with the weight of his words, my father turned to me. He said I was the one who never gave up on him, that I was the one who quietly stood by his side through every hard time, while others just waited for him to die so they could take what they wanted. He said I had his respect, his love, and that no one else had been there for him the way I had. The room was silent, dead silent. They had mocked me all morning, assuming my father's letter would be a punch to my reputation, but it was their reputations that were shattered. Every insult they threw at me crumbled in an instant. My father's final words weren't just a letter, they were my revenge. Quiet, subtle, but powerful enough to leave them speechless. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to argue or fight back. His letter did all the talking for me. And in that moment, I felt a quiet kind of power, the kind that doesn't need to scream to be heard.